The rain hammered against the windows of the small ranch house in Maple Grove, Ohio, creating a rhythm that 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez usually found comforting. Tonight, though, something felt different. She sat on her bedroom floor, her stuffed bunny Mr. Hoppers clutched tightly against her chest, building a tower with her wooden blocks. The sound of raised voices downstairs made her hands pause midair, a blue block hovering uncertainly. "Not again," she whispered to Mr. Hoppers, pressing the bunny's worn ear against her cheek. Downstairs, Sarah Rodriguez stood in the kitchen, her back against the counter, trapped. Marcus Webb, her boyfriend of 8 months, loomed in the doorway, his face flushed red with anger. The smell of alcohol hung heavy in the air between them. "I saw the text messages, Sarah. Don't lie to me." Marcus's voice was low, dangerous, the kind of quiet that preceded storms. "He's just a coworker, Marcus. We were discussing the project." At 9 o'clock at night, he took a step forward. Sarah's hand instinctively reached behind her, fingers grazing the edge of the kitchen knife block. She'd never imagined herself in this position, the kind of woman who needed an escape plan in her own home. "Please, Emma's upstairs. Can we talk about this tomorrow when you're calmer?" The mention of Emma seemed to ignite something worse in Marcus, always using that kid as an excuse. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of." Upstairs, Emma heard her mother's pleading tone, the scared voice that made her tummy hurt. She'd heard it before, usually followed by doors slamming and Marcus leaving in his loud truck. But tonight felt heavier, darker. The 3-year-old's instincts, not yet dulled by rationalization or denial, screamed danger. She crept out of her room, Mr. Hoppers dangling from one hand, her bare feet silent on the carpeted hallway. The voices grew louder as she approached the top of the stairs. Her mother was crying now. Emma knew that sound too well. "Marcus, please." "Shut up." Emma flinched at the volume, but something pulled her forward. She descended 3 steps, then 4, until she could peer through the wooden banister rails into the kitchen. What she saw would become frozen in her memory like a photograph, every detail sharp and terrible. Marcus had grabbed her mother by the shoulders, shaking her. Sarah's head snapped back and forth, her dark hair whipping around her face. Emma's small hands gripped the banister rails so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Stop it," Sarah screamed, pushing against Marcus's chest. The slap came so fast Emma almost didn't see it. The sound, sharp, cruel, echoed through the house. Sarah's head jerked to the side and she stumbled backward against the refrigerator. A magnet shaped like the Statue of Liberty, a souvenir from their New York trip, fell to the floor and shattered. Then came the punch. Marcus's fist connected with Sarah's face with a sickening thud. Blood spurted from her nose, spattering across her white blouse like crimson flowers blooming. She crumpled to the kitchen floor, her hands instinctively covering her face. Emma's scream tore through the house, high-pitched, primal, the sound of childhood innocence shattering. "Mommy." Marcus spun around, his eyes wild and unfocused. For a moment, he seemed not to recognize where he was or what he'd done. Then his gaze locked onto the little girl frozen on the stairs, her stuffed bunny clutched against her nightgown covered in pink elephants. Their eyes met, 3-year-old innocence facing adult violence. Emma saw something in his face that terrified her more than the blood, more than her mother's moans of pain. She saw awareness. She saw him calculating. Marcus took 3 quick steps toward the stairs. "You saw nothing, you hear me?" His voice was a harsh whisper. "Nothing happened, your mommy just fell." Emma scrambled backward up the stairs, her feet slipping on the carpet. Bad man hurt mommy." "Shut up." Marcus started up the stairs, but Sarah's voice stopped him. "Don't you touch her." Sarah had pulled herself up, leaning against the counter, blood streaming down her face. She grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the stove, holding it up with shaking hands. Get out now, or I swear to God." Marcus's face twisted with rage, then something shifted. Reality seemed to crash down on him. The crying child, the bleeding woman, the point of no return he just crossed. He turned and stumbled toward the front door. "This isn't over," he called back before slamming out into the rainy night. His truck engine roared to life, tires squealing as he peeled away. Sarah dropped the skillet and it clanged against the tile floor. She slid down to sit, her back against the cabinet, blood dripping onto her lap. "Emma," she called weakly. "Baby, it's okay. Mommy's okay." But Emma couldn't move. She'd retreated to her room and wedged herself into her closet behind the hanging dresses and winter coats. She rocked back and forth, Mr. Hoppers pressed against her face, whispering the same words over and over. "Bad man hurt mommy. Bad man hurt mommy. Bad man hurt mommy." 20 minutes later, red and blue lights painted the walls of Emma's closet. Mrs. Patterson from next door had called 911 after hearing the screaming. 2 officers found Sarah in the kitchen, trying to clean the blood with trembling hands. A female paramedic found Emma in the closet, still whispering her terrible mantra. As the ambulance doors closed on Sarah and a social worker gently coaxed Emma from her hiding place, neither of them knew that this night was just the beginning. The real battle, the one that would test the limits of justice, childhood memory, and a mother's determination to protect her daughter while seeking accountability, was yet to come. What 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez had witnessed would eventually echo through courtrooms, law schools, and living rooms across America. But first, they had to survive the night. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen sat in her cramped office at the Franklin County Courthouse, 3 cold cups of coffee forming a timeline across her desk. The Marcus Webb case file lay open before her, crime scene photos spread across the surface like a grim deck of cards. Sarah Rodriguez's swollen, purple face stared up from one photo. In another, blood spatters marked the kitchen floor in a pattern that told the story of violence. But it was the 4th photo that haunted Rebecca, a child's drawing from the initial welfare check. Emma had drawn it for the social worker. Stick figures, one big and angry with red scribbles for hands, one smaller figure on the ground with red coming from the circle that was her face, and a tiny figure in the corner with tears. "You're actually considering this?" Detective Mike Torres stood in her doorway, arms crossed. He'd been the first officer on scene that night, the one who'd found Emma in the closet. "I don't have a choice, Mike. Sarah's injuries prove assault, but Webb's lawyer will argue it was mutual combat, that she attacked first. Without Emma's testimony, it's he said, she said." "She's 3 years old, Beck. 3. My daughter just turned 4, and yesterday she told me she saw a dragon in the backyard." Rebecca rubbed her temples, feeling the migraine building behind her eyes. "I know. Believe me, I know." The detective's expression softened. What did Marcus say in his statement? That Sarah came at him with the skillet, that he pushed her in self-defense and she fell, hit her face on the counter. He's claiming she's making it up, trying to get full custody because they'd been fighting about his role in Emma's life. And Emma told 4 different people, the social worker, the forensic interviewer, the pediatrician, and the victim advocate, the exact same story. Bad man hurt mommy. She picked Marcus out of a photo array without hesitation. She even mimicked the hitting motion. Detective Torres shook his head. The defense is going to eat her alive. A 3-year-old can't handle cross-examination. Hell, most adults can't handle James Mitchell. James Mitchell, just the name made Rebecca's jaw clench. He was Ohio's most notorious defense attorney, famous for his scorched earth tactics. He'd gotten a murder acquitted last year by destroying the credibility of a 15-year-old witness. What would he do to a toddler? As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed. An email from Mitchell's office, motion to exclude minor witness. Rebecca clicked it open and felt her stomach drop as she read. The proposed witness, Emma Rodriguez, age 3 years and 4 months, lacks the cognitive development, linguistic ability, and understanding of truth versus fantasy necessary to provide competent testimony. Studies show children under age 5 are highly suggestible and cannot reliably distinguish between observed events and imagined scenarios. The motion went on for 12 pages, citing case law, psychological studies, and precedents. Mitchell was building a wall before Emma ever entered the courtroom. Rebecca's supervisor, District Attorney Harold Brennan, appeared behind Torres. "My office, now." The DA's corner office overlooked downtown Columbus. Brennan stood at the window, his reflection grim in the glass. Mitchell filed his motion. "I saw it. He's already talking to the press. Channel 6 is running a piece tonight. Prosecutor plans to traumatize toddler." The headline practically writes itself. "Harold, if we don't prosecute." "I know what happens if we don't prosecute." He spun around, and Rebecca saw the conflict in his eyes. Harold had a daughter too. But we have to be realistic. Judge Holloway could exclude Emma's testimony entirely, and then we've exposed that child to evaluation after evaluation for nothing. What's the alternative? Let Marcus Webb walk. He broke Sarah Rodriguez's nose and gave her a concussion. He terrorized them both. We offer a plea: misdemeanor assault, probation, anger management. Rebecca felt heat rise in her chest. He gets probation for nearly beating a woman unconscious in front of her child. He gets a record, and that little girl doesn't have to take the stand. That little girl watched her mother get brutalized, Harold. She's already traumatized. Maybe, just maybe, being heard, being believed, gives her some power back. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Brennan sighed. "It's your case. But if this blows up, if Mitchell makes that child look like a liar on the stand, if we lose and Emma Rodriguez ends up in therapy for years because we put her through this." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. 1 week later, Rebecca found herself in Judge Patricia Holloway's chambers for the competency hearing. The judge was a 20-year veteran of family court, a grandmother of 5, and notoriously impossible to read. James Mitchell sat across from Rebecca, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He smiled at her, all teeth, no warmth. "Your Honor," Mitchell began, his voice smooth as silk, "this is quite simply a case of prosecutorial overreach. 3-year-olds believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. They think cartoons are real. Asking a jury to convict based on the testimony of someone who still sleeps with a stuffed animal is not justice, it's a circus." Judge Holloway's expression remained neutral. "Ms. Chen." Rebecca stood, her notes trembling slightly in her hands. "Your Honor, Emma Rodriguez is a competent witness. Dr. Monica Phillips, a licensed child psychologist specializing in forensic interviews, has evaluated her extensively. Emma understands the difference between truth and lies. She can articulate what she saw in age-appropriate language. She identified the defendant without prompting. Her account has remained consistent across multiple interviews over 6 weeks." "Consistent because she's been coached," Mitchell interjected. "That's a baseless accusation," Rebecca fired back. "Dr. Phillips used nationally recognized protocols." "Enough." Judge Holloway raised her hand. "I've read Dr. Phillips's report. I've also read the defense's expert opinion from Dr. Raymond Clark, who says Emma is too young to testify reliably. We have 2 experts with completely opposite conclusions." The judge leaned back in her chair, and Rebecca held her breath. Everything hinged on this moment. "Here's what's going to happen," Judge Holloway said finally. "I'm going to interview Emma myself in chambers with both counsel present. No leading questions, no coaching. I'll ask her about truth and lies, about what she remembers, about reality versus imagination. Then I'll make my ruling." Mitchell smiled. "When, Your Honor?" "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., bring the child." As they filed out, Mitchell leaned close to Rebecca. "I hope you can sleep tonight, knowing what you're about to put that little girl through." Rebecca met his eyes. "I hope you can sleep, defending a man who beats women." But that night, lying awake in her apartment, Rebecca wasn't sure she could sleep at all. Tomorrow, Emma Rodriguez would face the first real test of her young life. And Rebecca had put her there. Dr. Monica Phillips's office looked nothing like a clinical space. Colorful cushions dotted the floor, shelves overflowed with toys and books, and a fish tank bubbled peacefully in the corner. A box of tissues sat discreetly on every surface, not for the children, but for the parents who brought them. Emma Rodriguez sat cross-legged on a purple floor cushion, Mr. Hoppers in her lap, eyeing Dr. Phillips with the cautious suspicion only a 3-year-old could muster. It was their first session, 2 days after Judge Holloway's order. "I like your bunny," Dr. Phillips said, settling onto a cushion across from Emma. She was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and an easy smile that had put thousands of traumatized children at ease. "What's his name?" "Mr. Hoppers." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's a very good name." Dr. Phillips reached for a red block from a nearby bin. "Emma, can you tell me what color this is?" Emma looked confused. "Red." "Very good." Dr. Phillips held up the same red block. "Now, what if I told you this block is blue? Would that be the truth?" A tiny smile tugged at Emma's lips. "No, that's silly, it's red." "You're absolutely right. So if I say something that's not true, that's called a lie, right?" Emma nodded, warming up slightly. "And telling the truth means saying what really happened, even if it's hard." Another nod. In the observation room behind the one-way mirror, Sarah watched with her arms wrapped around herself. Rebecca Chen stood beside her, taking notes. Through the speaker, they heard every word. "She's good," Rebecca murmured. "She's the best," Sarah replied, her voice hollow. She'd barely slept since the night of the assault. Dark circles hung under her eyes like bruises. "But is this right? Am I asking too much of her?" Rebecca didn't have an easy answer. "You're asking her to tell the truth. That's never wrong." "I brought him into our lives." Sarah's voice cracked. "I ignored the red flags, the temper, the jealousy, the drinking. I did this to her. Marcus Webb did this, not you." But Sarah couldn't hear it. Guilt was a language she'd become fluent in over the past weeks. By the third session, Emma had begun to trust Dr. Phillips. They played games, read stories, drew pictures. Never once did Dr. Phillips mention Marcus or that night. Instead, she taught Emma about feelings, about memories, about the difference between things that really happened and things we imagine. "Emma, do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning?" Emma thought hard, her face scrunching adorably. "Pancakes with syrup." "That's a real memory. Now, if I asked you if you had chocolate cake for breakfast, would that be real or pretend?" "Pretend," Emma giggled. "Mommy doesn't let me have cake for breakfast." "What if I really wanted you to say you had cake for breakfast? What if I asked you 5 times? Emma's face grew serious, understanding the game now. "Still pretend I had pancakes." Dr. Phillips smiled. "You're very smart, Emma." During the 4th session, Dr. Phillips finally broached the difficult topic. She didn't ask about that night directly. Instead, she asked Emma to tell her about feelings. "When do you feel happy?" "When Mommy reads to me. When I play with my blocks." "When do you feel scared?" Emma's hands tightened around Mr. Hoppers. Her voice dropped. "When there's yelling." "Does yelling happen sometimes at your house?" A nod. Emma's eyes were fixed on the floor. "It's okay to talk about scary things, Emma. You're safe here. Mr. Hoppers is here and I'm here. Nothing bad can happen in this room." Emma looked up, searching Dr. Phillips's face for confirmation. Finding it, she whispered, "The bad man yelled." "The bad man." Dr. Phillips kept her voice gentle, neutral. "Can you tell me about the bad man?" "He hurt my mommy." Emma's eyes filled with tears. There was red, she was crying. Dr. Phillips handed Emma a tissue. "That sounds very scary." "He looked at me." Emma's voice was so quiet now that Sarah, watching from the other room, had to strain to hear. "His eyes were mean. He said I saw nothing, but I saw him hurt her. In the observation room, Sarah crumpled into a chair, silent tears streaming down her face. Rebecca placed a hand on her shoulder. Through the speaker, Dr. Phillips's calm voice continued, "You did see something, and it's very brave of you to remember it. Is Mommy okay? Your mommy is okay. She's right in the other room and she loves you very much. Is the bad man coming back?" This was the question Dr. Phillips had been waiting for, the fear at the heart of Emma's trauma. "No, sweetie. The bad man can't come to your house anymore. Police officers made a rule that he has to stay away." "Promise." "I promise." By the sixth session, 2 days before the judge's interview, Dr. Phillips had a complete picture. Emma could distinguish truth from lies. She understood the concept of memory versus imagination. Her account of the assault had remained consistent, never elaborated with fantastical details, never coached, simply the traumatic truth as a 3-year-old had processed it. But Dr. Phillips was worried. She called Rebecca that evening. "She's competent to testify," Dr. Phillips said, "but there's something you need to understand. Emma is coping through avoidance. She talks about the bad man like a character in a story, something that happened to someone else. That's normal, healthy even. It's how her brain protects her." But Rebecca sensed the concern in the psychologist's voice. "But tomorrow, Judge Holloway is going to ask her to face it directly. And if this goes to trial, she'll have to look at Marcus Webb in person, potentially on closed-circuit television but still facing him. That protective wall she's built could crumble. The nightmares that haven't started yet might begin. We could be trading justice now for trauma that lasts years." Rebecca felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. "What do you recommend?" Dr. Phillips was quiet for a long moment. "I recommend you remember that Emma Rodriguez is not just a witness. She's a little girl who loves pancakes and stuffed bunnies and her mother. Whatever happens in that courtroom, she has to be able to go back to being just Emma, not the 3-year-old who testified, not a symbol or a precedent, just Emma." That night Sarah lay in bed with Emma, reading Goodnight Moon for the 3rd time. Emma's eyes were finally growing heavy. "Mommy," Emma murmured. "Yes, baby." "Tomorrow I have to talk to the judge lady." Sarah's throat tightened. "Yes, but Dr. Phillips will be there, and Mommy will be right outside. You're so brave, Emma." "I don't feel brave." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "That's okay. Brave people feel scared too. They just do the right thing anyway." Emma thought about this, then nodded against her mother's chest. Within minutes she was asleep. But Sarah stayed awake until dawn, wondering if asking her daughter to be brave was the right thing, or the most selfish thing she'd ever done. Judge Patricia Holloway's chambers had been transformed. Gone were the leather-bound law books and intimidating mahogany furniture. In their place, a small round table sat surrounded by child-sized chairs, crayons and paper spread across the surface. A purple beanbag chair, hastily borrowed from the court's victim services office, rested in the corner. The judge had even dimmed the fluorescent lights, replacing their harsh glare with the warm glow of a desk lamp. Emma Rodriguez stood in the doorway, one hand gripping Sarah's fingers, the other clutching Mr. Hopper's so tightly his stuffing bunched awkwardly. Her eyes were wide, taking in the unfamiliar space. "Hello, Emma." Judge Holloway's voice was gentler than Rebecca had ever heard it. The judge had removed her black robe, sitting instead in a simple lavender cardigan that made her look more like someone's grandmother than an arbiter of justice. "I'm Judge Holloway, but you can call me Ms. Pat if that's easier." Emma didn't respond, pressing closer to her mother's leg. Dr. Phillips knelt beside Emma. "Remember what we talked about. Ms. Pat just wants to ask you some questions like we've been practicing. And look, she has crayons. Maybe after you talk, you could draw Ms. Pat a picture." The mention of crayons sparked a flicker of interest. Emma nodded slowly. Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head, her lips lingering. "I'll be right outside, baby. Right outside that door. You're going to do great." As Sarah reluctantly released her daughter's hand and left the room, Emma's bottom lip trembled. But Dr. Phillips guided her to the beanbag chair, settling beside her on a cushion. Rebecca and James Mitchell sat at opposite ends of the room, required to be present but instructed to remain silent unless directly addressed by the judge. Mitchell looked confident, his legal pad already filled with notes. Rebecca felt like she might vomit. Judge Holloway pulled a small chair closer to Emma, careful to maintain a comfortable distance. "Emma, I like your bunny. Does he have a name?" "Mr. Hoppers." The voice was barely audible. "That's a wonderful name. Does Mr. Hoppers help you feel brave?" Emma nodded, hugging the stuffed animal tighter. "That's good. Everyone needs something that makes them feel brave." Judge Holloway picked up a red crayon. "Emma, what color is this?" "Red," Emma answered, slightly louder now. "Very good." The judge held up the same crayon. "What if I told you this crayon is green? Would I be telling the truth?" A tiny smile appeared. "No, it's red." "You're right. So if I say something that isn't true, what is that called?" "A lie." "Excellent. And do you know what truth means?" Emma thought carefully, remembering her sessions with Dr. Phillips, saying what really happened. Judge Holloway's eyebrows raised slightly. She glanced at Dr. Phillips, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "That's exactly right. Now, Emma, if I asked you what you ate for breakfast today, would you tell me the truth or a lie?" "The truth." "What did you have?" "Cheerios and orange juice." "Delicious. And what if I really wanted you to say you had pizza for breakfast? Would you say pizza to make me happy, even if it wasn't true?" Emma shook her head firmly. "I had Cheerios. Pizza is for dinner." Mitchell shifted in his chair, and Rebecca saw his confidence waver slightly. Emma was more coherent than he'd expected. Judge Holloway spent the next 10 minutes asking gentle questions, establishing that Emma understood reality versus pretend, memory versus imagination, yesterday versus last week. With each answer, Emma grew more comfortable, her voice stronger. Then the judge's tone shifted, became softer. "Emma, Dr. Phillips told me that something scary happened at your house. Can you tell me about it?" The change in Emma was immediate. Her body tensed, her face paled. She pulled Mr. Hoppers against her chest like a shield. "It's okay," Dr. Phillips murmured. "You're safe. Nothing bad can happen here." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "The bad night." "Can you tell me about the bad night?" Emma stared at the floor, her words coming slowly. "There was yelling. Mommy was scared. I heard her crying." "Where were you when you heard the crying?" "In my room with my blocks." Emma's hands moved unconsciously, as if stacking invisible blocks. "Then I went to the stairs." "Why did you go to the stairs?" "To see Mommy, to make sure she was okay." Judge Holloway leaned forward slightly. "And what did you see when you got to the stairs?" Emma's breathing quickened. "The bad man, he was shaking Mommy. Her head went like this." She moved her head back and forth rapidly, demonstrating. "Then he hit her." The room fell absolutely silent. Even Mitchell had stopped writing. "He hit her." Judge Holloway's voice remained calm, but Rebecca saw her grip tighten on her armrest. "Yes, with his hand like this." Emma made a slapping motion. "And then he made a fist and punched. Mommy fell down. There was red on her face, so much red." Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks, but her voice remained steady, clear. This wasn't a coached story or a confused memory. This was truth, raw and terrible, from someone too young to fabricate such horror. "That must have been very frightening," Judge Holloway said gently. "I screamed. I was scared. Then the bad man looked at me." "What did he do when he looked at you?" Emma's whole body shuddered. "He came to the stairs," he said. She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "He said I saw nothing, that Mommy fell, but that's a lie. He hit her, I saw." Judge Holloway reached for a folder on the table. Inside were 6 photographs, 5 men and 1 woman, all around Marcus Webb's age and build. "Emma, I'm going to show you some pictures. Can you look at them and tell me if you see the person who hurt your mommy?" Dr. Phillips helped Emma stand, guiding her to the table. The little girl looked at each photo carefully, her finger hovering over each face. When she reached the 3rd photograph, Marcus Webb's DMV photo, her hand stopped. Her entire body went rigid. "That's him," her voice was small but certain. "That's the bad man." "You're sure?" Emma looked up at the judge, and in that moment, everyone in the room saw something that transcended age and size. They saw a witness. They saw someone who knew, with absolute certainty, what she had seen. "I'm sure that's his face. Those are his mean eyes." Judge Holloway closed the folder. "Thank you, Emma. You were very brave today." "Is he going to come back?" The question cracked Emma's composure. Fresh tears spilled over. "Is the bad man going to come to my house?" "No, sweetie, he won't come to your house, I promise." "But you're a judge. You can make promises." Despite the gravity of the moment, Judge Holloway smiled. "Yes, Emma, judges can make promises, and I promise you're safe." Emma nodded, seeming to accept this. Dr. Phillips wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You did wonderful, Emma. Should we go see Mommy now?" As Dr. Phillips led Emma from the room, the little girl paused at the door. She turned back to Judge Holloway. "Ms. Pat." "Yes, Emma." "I didn't lie, I told the truth." "I know you did, sweetheart, I know." When the door closed behind them, Judge Holloway sat back in her chair, her professional composure cracking. She removed her reading glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. "Your Honor," Mitchell began. "Not now, Mr. Mitchell." The judge's voice was thick with emotion. "Give me a moment." Rebecca remained frozen in her chair, her heart pounding. She just watched a 3-year-old do what many adults couldn't, face her trauma and speak truth to power. Finally, Judge Holloway looked up, first at Mitchell, then at Rebecca. When she spoke, her voice was steady, final. "The minor witness, Emma Rodriguez, is competent to testify. She understands truth versus falsehood, maintains consistent recall, and can articulate observed events in age-appropriate language." She paused, her gaze hardening as she looked at Mitchell. "And counselor, if you cross-examine that child with anything less than the utmost respect, I will hold you in contempt so fast it will make your head spin. Are we clear?" Mitchell's jaw clenched. "Crystal, Your Honor." As they filed out, Rebecca found Sarah in the hallway, Emma wrapped in her arms. The little girl was already asking about the crayons, the trauma of reliving that night momentarily forgotten in the resilience of childhood. But Rebecca knew, they all knew, that the hardest part was still ahead. Emma had spoken in the safety of chambers, with gentle voices and purple beanbag chairs. The real courtroom, with its formal proceedings and Marcus Webb's physical presence, would be an entirely different battlefield. The courtroom of Franklin County Common Pleas was packed to capacity. Every seat filled, reporters lined the back wall, sketch artists perched in the front row since cameras weren't allowed. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation and judgment. Everyone had come to see the same thing, a 3-year-old take the witness stand. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table in a gray suit that made him look almost respectable, almost harmless. His hands were folded on the table, his expression carefully neutral. But when Sarah entered the courtroom, his eyes followed her with an intensity that made Rebecca's skin crawl. Sarah didn't look at him. She couldn't. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, ranging from a 23-year-old college student to a 70-year-old retired teacher, filed in with solemn faces. They'd been told what was coming. Nothing could quite prepare them. Judge Holloway entered and the room rose as one. "Be seated. We're here for the continuation of State versus Webb. Ms. Chen, call your witness." Rebecca stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The state calls Emma Rodriguez." A collective intake of breath rippled through the gallery. All eyes turned to the side door. Dr. Phillips entered first, then Emma, holding her hand. The little girl wore a pink dress with white flowers. Sarah had let her pick it out herself. Mr. Hopper's was tucked under her arm. Emma's eyes went wide as she took in the crowded room, the high ceilings, the American flag that seemed impossibly tall. "Oh my God, she's so small," someone whispered in the gallery. Judge Holloway had arranged for Emma to testify via closed-circuit television from a nearby conference room, but Emma had surprised everyone. During a pre-trial preparation visit, she'd asked to talk in the big room. Dr. Phillips had explained the difference, shown her photos, but Emma had been insistent with the stubborn determination only a toddler could muster. "I want to tell everyone, so everyone knows what the bad man did." Now facing the reality of that big room, Emma faltered. Her steps slowed. Dr. Phillips knelt beside her, whispering something no one else could hear. Emma nodded, straightened her shoulders in a gesture so brave and small it broke hearts throughout the courtroom, and continued walking. A court officer had replaced the traditional witness chair with a booster seat. Emma climbed up with Dr. Phillips's help, her legs dangling well above the floor. The bailiff approached with the Bible, then paused, looking to Judge Holloway. "Emma," the judge said kindly, "do you promise to tell the truth today, just like we talked about?" "Yes." Emma's voice, amplified by the microphone, filled the courtroom. Several jurors leaned forward instinctively, as if to protect this tiny witness. Rebecca approached slowly, keeping her voice gentle. "Hi, Emma, can you tell everyone your name?" "Emma Rose Rodriguez." She pronounced each word carefully, the way she'd practiced. "How old are you, Emma?" "3, but I'll be 4 in 2 months and 16 days. Sarah had told her that this morning, and Emma had memorized it proudly. A few people in the gallery smiled, despite the tension. "Emma, do you remember the night when something scary happened at your house?" The smile vanished from Emma's face. She nodded, gripping Mr. Hopper's tighter. "Can you tell us what you saw?" Emma's voice dropped, but the microphone caught every word. "I was playing with blocks. I heard yelling. Mommy was crying." She took a shaky breath. "I went to the stairs. I saw the bad man hurting Mommy." "How was he hurting her?" "He shook her, then he hit her face. Then he made a fist and punched. Mommy fell down. There was red, so much red on her face and her shirt." Several jurors visibly reacted. One woman covered her mouth. Another's eyes glistened with tears. "Emma, do you see that person in the courtroom today?" This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Emma's eyes scanned the room, dancing past the lawyers, the judge, the jury. Then they landed on Marcus Webb. Her whole body went rigid, her breathing quickened. "That's him," she whispered, then louder, "that's the bad man." Marcus stared back, his face impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Let the record show," Judge Holloway said, "that the witness has identified the defendant, Marcus Webb." Rebecca asked a few more questions, all answered consistently, clearly. Then came the moment everyone dreaded. "Your witness, Mr. Mitchell." James Mitchell stood slowly. He'd promised the judge he'd be respectful, but Rebecca knew he'd push every boundary. He approached Emma with exaggerated gentleness, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "Hello, Emma, that's a pretty bunny you have." Emma said nothing, watching him warily. "Emma, you love your mommy very much, don't you?" "Yes." "And your mommy has been very sad since that night, hasn't she?" "Objection," Rebecca called. "Relevance." "I'm establishing bias, Your Honor." "Overruled, but tread carefully, Mr. Mitchell." "Emma, has your mommy talked to you about that night? Asked you to remember certain things?" Emma's brow furrowed, confused. "Dr. Phillips talked to me. We played games." "But your mommy, has she told you what to say today?" "No," Emma's voice was firm. "Mommy said to tell the truth, so I am." Mitchell tried a different angle. "Emma, sometimes when we're scared, we see things that aren't really there, like monsters under the bed. could you have imagined? I saw him hit her. Emma's voice rose, and she pointed at Marcus. He hit my mommy and she fell and there was blood and he told me I saw nothing but I did see. I did. Tears streamed down Emma's face now. Dr. Phillips moved to comfort her, but Emma pushed on, her words tumbling out in a rush of 3-year-old fury and pain. He's lying. He's the liar, not me. I told the truth. I promised Ms. Pat I would tell the truth. The courtroom erupted. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. Order, Mr. Mitchell, I think we're done here. Mitchell, visibly shaken by the outburst, nodded. No further questions. As Dr. Phillips led a sobbing Emma from the stand, not a single person in that courtroom doubted what they'd witnessed. Not testimony. Not coaching. Raw, honest truth from someone too young to fabricate, too innocent to manipulate. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The words hung in the air like thunder. Marcus Webb's face crumbled, the carefully maintained composure shattering. Sarah sobbed into her sister's shoulder, years of fear and guilt pouring out in that moment. Judge Holloway sentenced him to 4 years in prison, the maximum allowed for felonious assault. But outside the courthouse, the real trial was just beginning. News vans crowded the street. Breaking. 3-year-old's testimony convict's abuser scrolled across the Channel 6 chyron. By dinner time, Emma's case was national news. CNN brought in legal experts who argued passionately on both sides. This is a groundbreaking moment for child witnesses, declared one prosecutor-turned-commentator. Children deserve to be heard. This is dangerous precedent, countered a defense attorney. We're allowing testimony from witnesses who still believe in fairy tales. What's next? 2-year-olds, infants. Twitter exploded. Justice for Emma trended alongside child witness concern. Think pieces flooded online magazines. Parenting blogs dissected Sarah's decisions. Was she brave or reckless? Protective or exploitative? Sarah's phone became a weapon. Messages of support. You're a hero. Thank you for being strong. Mixed with venom. You traumatized your own child for revenge. That baby will need therapy for life because of you. A morning show producer left 3 voicemails, offering Sarah $50,000 for an exclusive interview. Bring Emma, the last message said. America wants to meet her. Sarah blocked the number, her hands shaking. At the domestic violence shelter where she'd started volunteering, women approached her with tears in their eyes. I have a 5-year-old who saw everything, one woman whispered. I was too scared to report. You showed me it's possible. But another woman pulled her aside, anger in her voice. My daughter testified when she was 6. She's 13 now and still has nightmares about that courtroom. You had a choice. You chose wrong. That night Sarah lay awake, Emma finally asleep after 2 hours of nightmares. Had she chosen wrong? Emma had been so brave, so strong on that stand. But at what cost? Through the baby monitor, Sarah heard Emma whimper in her sleep. I told the truth. I told the truth. Sarah closed her eyes against tears. Justice had been served. Marcus Webb was behind bars. But as dawn broke over Columbus, Ohio, Sarah wondered if anyone had truly won, or if they'd all just lost in different ways. 6 months after the verdict, Emma woke up screaming. It was 3:47 a.m. when Sarah bolted upright, her heart hammering. She rushed down the hall to Emma's room, flipping on the light to find her daughter thrashing in her small bed, eyes squeezed shut, trapped in whatever nightmare held her. The bad man, he's coming. Mommy, he's coming. Emma, wake up, baby, wake up, it's just a dream. Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms, feeling the small body trembling violently. You're safe, I'm here. Emma's eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a terrifying moment, she didn't seem to recognize her mother. Then reality crashed back, and she dissolved into sobs, clinging to Sarah with desperate strength. He was in my closet, his mean eyes, he said I'm a liar. You're not a liar, you told the truth, remember. and he's far away, he can't come here." But even as Sarah spoke the words, she felt them ring hollow. Marcus Webb was in prison, yes, locked behind bars 60 miles away. But he haunted their home anyway, a ghost that lived in shadows and sudden noises, in Emma's increasingly frequent nightmares, in the hypervigilance that made the little girl flinch at raised voices. This was the third nightmare this week. They were getting worse. The next morning, Sarah called Dr. Phillips. "The trial was 6 months ago. I thought she'd be getting better by now." Dr. Phillips's sigh carried understanding and sadness. "Trauma doesn't follow a timeline, Sarah. Emma held it together during the trial. She was so focused on being brave, on telling the truth. Now that it's over, her brain is finally processing what happened. The nightmares, the anxiety, they're normal, actually. Her mind is trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense." "So what do I do?" "We keep working, play therapy, maybe some art therapy. And Sarah," Dr. Phillips paused, "you might want to consider a fresh start, somewhere that doesn't carry so many triggers." 2 months later, a moving truck pulled away from the house on Maple Grove. Sarah watched it go, Emma beside her holding Mr. Hoppers and a new stuffed elephant Dr. Phillips had given her. Ella the Brave, they'd named her. They were moving to Riverside, a small town 3 hours north. New house, new preschool, new name. "Why can't I be Emma anymore?" Emma had asked when Sarah explained they'd be using Sarah's maiden name, Bennett. "You're still Emma, baby. Emma Rose Bennett just sounds nice, doesn't it? Like a fresh beginning." Emma had considered this with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster. "Can Mr. Hoppers be Mr. Bennett Hoppers?" "Absolutely." The new house was smaller, cozier, with a backyard that had a tire swing. No memories lived in these walls. No blood stains had been scrubbed from this kitchen floor. Sarah had chosen it specifically for that, the blankness, the possibility of writing new stories. Emma's new preschool teacher, Miss Jennifer, knew nothing about courtrooms or testimony. She knew only that Emma Bennett was a bright, sometimes anxious little girl who loved art projects and insisted on bringing 2 stuffed animals to school instead of 1. "Is that allowed?" Emma had whispered on the first day. "For you, absolutely," Miss Jennifer had said, earning Emma's tentative trust. Slowly, painfully slowly, the nightmares became less frequent. Emma made a friend, Riley, a boy her age who shared her love of building blocks and had no idea she'd once been the youngest witness in Franklin County history. Sarah found work at a local women's center, answering phones, scheduling appointments, learning the language of survival from women who'd walked paths similar to hers. She attended a support group every Thursday night while Emma stayed with a babysitter who taught her to make friendship bracelets. The first time Sarah shared her story in the circle of survivors, her voice shook. "I brought him into our home. I ignored the signs. My daughter had to testify in court because of my mistakes." A woman across the circle, Angela, a mother of 2, shook her head firmly. "No, your daughter testified because of his choices. He hit you. He terrorized you both. You didn't make him do that." Sarah wanted to believe it. Some days she almost did. One Tuesday evening, a woman approached Sarah after the support group. She was younger, maybe 25, with haunted eyes that Sarah recognized immediately. "You're her, aren't you? Sarah Rodriguez, I saw you on the news." Sarah tensed, ready for judgment. "It's Bennett now, and yes." "My daughter," the woman's voice cracked. "She's 5. She saw her father hit me, throw me down the stairs. I've been too scared to report it. He said if I did, he'd take her, that no one would believe me over him." Tears spilled over. "But I saw what you did, how your daughter was so brave, and I thought, maybe we could be brave too." Sarah took the woman's hands. "What's your name?" "Christina." "Christina, come with me." Sarah led her to the center's intake coordinator, stayed with her while she filed the police report, held her while she cried. At the end of the night, Christina hugged Sarah tight. "Thank you. You saved us." Driving home, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing. She wasn't sure she'd ever fully heal, but purpose. Emma's voice in that courtroom had reached farther than she'd imagined, touching women she'd never meet, children she'd never know. Maybe the nightmares and the move, and the name change hadn't been for nothing. 4 months after moving to Riverside, on a crisp autumn morning, Emma came running from the backyard, cheeks flushed with joy. "Mommy, Mommy, I pushed myself on the swing all by myself, I went so high." Sarah dropped the dish towel and ran outside to watch. Emma pumped her legs, the tire swing arcing higher and higher, her laughter ringing out pure and clear. In that moment, she wasn't Emma Rodriguez, the 3-year-old who'd testified. She wasn't a victim or a witness or a symbol. She was just Emma, flying high on a swing, 4 years old and fearless. That night, for the first time in 8 months, Emma slept through without nightmares. Sarah stood in her doorway, watching her daughter's peaceful face in the glow of the nightlight shaped like a rainbow. Mr. Hoppers lay tucked under one arm, Ella the Brave under the other, the companions who'd helped her through the darkness. Tomorrow the nightmares might return. The trauma wasn't gone, just sleeping. But tonight, right now, Emma was at peace. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Angela. "Another woman asked about your case at group tonight. She wants to know if her son can testify. You're changing lives, Sarah." Sarah looked at her sleeping daughter, then back at the message. They'd paid such a high price for justice. The nightmares, the fear, the loss of innocence that came too early. But maybe, just maybe, that price was buying freedom for other children, other mothers. She typed back, "Tell her I'll talk to her, and Angela, thank you." Closing Emma's door softly, Sarah walked to her own room. On the nightstand sat a photo from before, Emma at 2, chubby-cheeked and innocent, unaware that one day she'd have to be the bravest person in a courtroom. Beside it, a new photo. Emma on her first day at Riverside Preschool, gap-toothed grin, wearing a shirt that said "Strong like Mommy." Sarah picked up the new photo and smiled through tears. They were surviving. More than that, they were living. The echoes of that terrible night still reverberated through their lives, but they were learning to sing over them, louder and stronger. And somewhere, in living rooms and shelters and lawyers' offices across the country, other children were finding their voices too, emboldened by the memory of a 3-year-old who'd looked fear in the face and said, "I told the truth." The echoes would never fully fade, but they'd learn to dance with them, to transform pain into purpose, trauma into testimony. And that, Sarah realized, might be the truest form of justice after all. Professor David Kim stood before his evidence law class at Stanford Law School, the words "State v. Webb" projected on the screen behind him. 75 first-year students sat with laptops open, some eager, some hungover, all about to have their assumptions challenged. "A 3-year-old witness," Professor Kim began. "Show of hands, who thinks that's appropriate?" 3 hands rose tentatively. The rest of the class sat still, uncomfortable. "And who thinks it's absolutely inappropriate?" 40 hands shot up. "Good, now let me tell you why you're all both right and wrong." He clicked to the next slide, Emma's case details. Identity redacted but facts intact. "By the end of this semester, you'll write a paper arguing either for or against the ruling in this case. And I promise you, no matter which side you choose, you'll understand why the other side has merit." It was spring 2021, 18 months after Emma's testimony, and State v. Webb had become the most debated case in evidence law circles across America. In Sacramento, California Assemblywoman Patricia Nguyen held up a stack of papers in the legislative chamber. Emma's law was printed across the top. "This bill establishes clear protocols for child witnesses under the age of 5, she announced to her colleagues. "Mandatory competency evaluations by licensed child psychologists. Required use of closed-circuit television testimony. Specially trained attorneys for both prosecution and defense. And most importantly, judicial discretion to exclude testimony if the emotional harm to the child outweighs the probative value. The chamber erupted in debate. "We're protecting children," Nguyen insisted. "We're silencing victims," her opponent countered. "What message does it send when we tell children they're too young to be believed?" After 3 months of heated argument, Emma's law passed by a narrow margin. California became the first state to formally codify protections for very young witnesses. But 2,000 miles away, Georgia went the opposite direction. State Senator William Bradshaw introduced the Child Witness Protection Act, a bill that banned testimony from any child under 7 years old, no exceptions. "We're talking about children who believe in the tooth fairy," Bradshaw argued on the Senate floor. "Children whose memories are formed by cartoons and imagination. We cannot build our justice system on such an unreliable foundation. Yes, it's tragic when children witness violence, but putting them on the stand causes more harm than good." The Georgia bill passed with overwhelming support. Overnight, America's justice system fractured into 2 camps, with Emma Rodriguez's voice, now silent, hidden behind a new name in a new town, as the fault line. At the American Bar Association's annual conference in Chicago, a special task force convened. 12 attorneys, 6 prosecutors, 6 defense lawyers sat around a conference table, tasked with creating national guidelines for child witnesses. The tension was immediate. "Children have a constitutional right to be heard," insisted Valerie Chen, a victims' rights attorney from New York. "We can't create arbitrary age cutoffs that silence an entire population. And defendants have a constitutional right to confront their accusers," countered Thomas Brenner, a defense attorney from Texas. "How is that possible when the witness can't understand cross-examination, can't grasp the concept of reasonable doubt?" The debate raged for 2 days. Finally, they reached a compromise: the Webb Protocols, named after the landmark case. Mandatory competency hearings for any witness under 6. Requirement of expert psychological evaluation. Special training for attorneys examining child witnesses. Judicial authority to modify courtroom procedures. Automatic review by appellate courts in cases where child testimony was decisive. It wasn't perfect. Neither side was fully satisfied, but it was a framework, something courts could reference when facing their own impossible decisions. In courtrooms across the country, State v. Webb became a weapon. In Portland, Oregon, a prosecutor cited the case to allow a 4-year-old to testify against her grandfather in a sexual abuse case. Emma Rodriguez was 3 and proved competent. This child is older and equally credible. The defense appealed. The Oregon Supreme Court ruled in favor of the prosecution, and the grandfather was convicted. In Atlanta, Georgia, a defense attorney cited the same case to exclude a 6-year-old's testimony in a domestic violence case. Georgia law, informed by the concerns raised in State v. Webb, recognizes that young children cannot reliably testify. The prosecution appealed. The Georgia Supreme Court upheld the exclusion, and the defendant walked free. Same case, opposite outcomes. Legal scholars published dozens of papers. The Webb Paradox: How One Case Divided a Nation became required reading in law schools. Symposiums were held. Careers were built or destroyed on which side attorneys chose. Judge Patricia Holloway, now 3 years into retirement, received speaking invitations weekly. She declined most, but occasionally she'd accept, usually at judicial conferences where she could speak to her peers. At one such conference in Boston, a young family court judge approached her during the reception. "Judge Holloway, I have a case right now, a 5-year-old who witnessed her mother's murder. The defense is citing Georgia law. The prosecutor is citing your ruling. I honestly don't know what to do." Patricia Holloway set down her wine glass. Let me tell you what I learned from Emma Rodriguez. There's no perfect answer. If you allow the testimony, that child carries the weight of that courtroom forever. If you exclude it, a murderer might walk free and that child learns her voice doesn't matter. She paused, her eyes distant. What I asked myself was this: if I were that child 20 years from now, what would I want? Would I want to have been protected from the trauma of testifying? Or would I want to have been heard? And the young judge pressed. I still don't know if I made the right call, Patricia admitted. But I can tell you that Emma Rodriguez looked at me and said, I told the truth. And in that moment, I believed that being heard, truly heard, was more important than being protected from the difficulty of speaking. By 2024, State v. Webb had been cited in over 300 cases across 42 states. Law review articles dedicated entire issues to analyzing its implications. The Innocence Project both praised and criticized it, praised for empowering child victims, criticized for potentially contributing to false convictions. Dr. Monica Phillips published her comprehensive study, Long-Term Psychological Outcomes in Child Witnesses, a 5-year follow-up. The data was complex, refusing to provide easy answers. Some child witnesses thrived, finding empowerment in being believed. Others struggled with anxiety, PTSD, and trust issues years later. The question isn't whether children should testify, Dr. Phillips concluded in her paper. The question is how we support them when they do, and how we honor their truth while protecting their well-being. Her study became the foundation for new therapeutic protocols used in courtrooms nationwide. Child advocacy centers, trauma-informed interview techniques, post-testimony counseling programs. Emma Rodriguez, now Emma Bennett, would never know that her 8 minutes on a witness stand had rewritten the rules of American jurisprudence. She'd never know that law students studied her words, that judges invoked her courage, that other children found their voices because she'd found hers. She was too busy being a second grader who loved soccer and hated spelling tests, who had no memory of purple beanbag chairs or microphones, or a courtroom that had held its breath to hear her speak. But across America, in courtrooms and law schools and legislative chambers, Emma's voice still echoed, not as a definitive answer, but as a profound question that forced everyone to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes justice requires us to ask the impossible of the most vulnerable among us, and sometimes, miraculously, they prove strong enough to answer. The debate would never be settled, but because of one 3-year-old who refused to be silenced, it would never be ignored again. Spring 2025. Emma Bennett sat at her desk in Mrs. Morrison's 3rd-grade classroom, tongue poking out in concentration as she carefully colored a butterfly for her science project. She was 8 years old now, with gap-toothed smile and scraped knees from recess soccer games. Her best friend Mia sat beside her, arguing passionately about whether butterflies could see the color red. They can, Emma insisted. It says so in the book. But how do we know they can? Like, did a butterfly tell someone? Emma giggled at the absurdity. Life was good, simple, full of butterfly debates and spelling tests and the exciting news that she'd made the travel soccer team. She had no memory of being 3 years old in a courtroom. No memory of purple beanbag chairs or a judge named Ms. Pat or the weight of a microphone amplifying her voice to a world that desperately needed to hear it. Sometimes in the deepest parts of sleep, shadows moved through her dreams, a feeling more than a memory, a sense of fear that had no name. But they came rarely now, ghosts growing fainter with each passing year. Her mother had promised her once, "You won't always carry this weight, baby. Someday it will just be a story about how brave you were, and then even that will fade." Sarah had been right. That same afternoon, Sarah Bennett, formerly Rodriguez, stood before a room of 30 women at the Riverside County Domestic Violence Center. She'd been working there for 3 years now, promoted from receptionist to victim advocate to head of the survivor support program. "My name is Sarah," she began, as she did every Tuesday. And 6 years ago, I was where many of you are now. She told her story, not the version the news had reported, not the legal case that had divided a nation, but the human story. The story of a woman who'd ignored red flags, who'd convinced herself love could fix anger, who'd learned too late that violence only escalates. The hardest part wasn't leaving him, Sarah said. The hardest part was forgiving myself for staying as long as I did, for exposing my daughter to that environment. A young woman in the back raised her hand tentatively. But you got justice. Your daughter testified and he went to prison. That must have made it easier. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. Justice came with a price. My daughter was brave, so impossibly brave, but she paid for that bravery in nightmares and anxiety. Even now, years later, I wonder if I made the right choice, if protecting her would have been better than seeking justice. Do you regret it? Another woman asked. Sarah thought of Christina, the woman who'd approached her years ago and found the courage to report because of Emma's testimony. She thought of the dozens of women since then who'd told her similar stories, how knowing one child had spoken gave them permission to let their children speak too. I regret that it was necessary, Sarah said finally, but I don't regret that we did it. My daughter taught me something that day in court. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most truth, and sometimes being heard is its own form of healing. After the meeting, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her husband Tom, the kind elementary school teacher she'd married 2 years ago. Emma got an A on her math test, celebrating with ice cream. Want us to bring you some? Sarah smiled, texting back a heart emoji. This ordinary happiness, this simple domesticity, had seemed impossible once. Now it was her life. 60 miles south, in a halfway house in Columbus, Marcus Webb sat at a mandatory anger management session. He'd been released on parole 4 months ago after serving 3.5 years of his 4-year sentence. The facilitator, a stern woman named Barbara, wasn't impressed by his sullen silence. Marcus, you haven't participated once in 6 weeks. That's a parole violation. He looked up, jaw clenched. What do you want me to say? That I've changed, that I've learned my lesson? I want you to take responsibility. I did 3.5 years because a 3-year-old told lies about me. The room went silent. Barbara leaned forward. That 3-year-old told the truth. The jury believed her. The judge believed her. And until you believe it too, you'll never actually change. Marcus said nothing, but something flickered across his face. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the shadow of it. The beginning of a crack in the armor of denial. He was required to stay 500 miles away from Sarah and Emma per his parole conditions. He'd Googled Sarah once, late at night in a moment of weakness, and found nothing. She disappeared, changed her name, vanished into a new life he could never touch. Good, part of him thought. The part that woke up some nights remembering a little girl's terrified face, her small voice saying, "That's the bad man." He'd never be welcome at that anger management session, never fully embrace accountability. But the laws that kept him away from them, the parole conditions that monitored his every move, those were because Emma Rodriguez had spoken. Her voice still protected them, even in silence. Dr. Monica Phillips sat in her home office, reviewing the galleys of her new book, The Smallest Witness, A Decade of Child Testimony Reform. Publication was scheduled for next month. In the final chapter, she'd written about a little girl she couldn't name who'd testified at 3 years old and changed everything. She'd tracked Emma's progress through carefully anonymized case notes, the nightmares, the therapy, the gradual healing, and finally, the thriving. The question we must ask, she'd written, is not whether children can testify, but whether we as a society can create systems that allow them to do so without sacrificing their childhood in the process. Emma's case proved children can be credible witnesses. The years that followed proved we still have much to learn about protecting them. Her phone rang. A prosecutor from Denver asking her to evaluate a 4-year-old witness in an assault case. "I'll send you my protocols," Dr. Phillips said, opening her email. The web protocols based on Emma's case had become her life's work. One child's voice amplified across a nation. In her cottage in northern Ohio, 72-year-old Patricia Holloway watered her garden, enjoying retirement. But on her desk inside, she kept one item from her 30 years on the bench, a photograph of a purple beanbag chair. On difficult days, she'd look at it and remember, sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. Sometimes justice speaks in the smallest voices. That evening, Sarah picked Emma up from soccer practice. Emma chattered excitedly about the goal she'd almost scored, about Mia's upcoming birthday party, about the butterfly project that was due Friday. "Mom, why are you crying?" Emma asked suddenly, noticing the tears on Sarah's cheeks. Sarah wiped them away, laughing. "Happy tears, baby. I'm just so proud of you. For soccer. For everything. For being exactly who you are." Emma shrugged, already distracted by something out the window. A dog, a bird, the ordinary miracles of childhood. She'd never remember the courtroom. Never know that her 8 minutes of testimony had rewritten laws, inspired survivors, divided scholars, and saved lives. She'd never carry the weight of being a symbol. She would only ever be Emma, brave in ways she couldn't remember, strong in ways she'd never need to prove again, free to be simply, beautifully, ordinarily herself. And perhaps that was the greatest justice of all, that a child forced to be extraordinary could grow up to be wonderfully, perfectly ordinary. The story of what happened after a 3-year-old spoke in court wasn't really about the testimony, the trial, or even the verdict. It was about what came after, the healing, the ripples, the lives changed and laws rewritten, and children who found their voices because one child had found hers. It was about survival, about transformation, about the incredible resilience of the human spirit, especially when that spirit stood only 3 feet tall. Emma Rodriguez had spoken her truth when it mattered most. Emma Bennett got to live her life in peace. And somewhere between those two names, those two versions of the same brave girl, justice, imperfect and complicated and costly, had been served. The end.